I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey Lurkers, welcome to this week's episode. This week, as promised, we are continuing our Pennsylvania journey on the Appalachian Trail in part 2 of the Pennsylvania section. You don't really need to go back and listen to part 1 first if you haven't already listened to it. I kind of recommend it only because of the flow. Where we start here, we left off at the last episode, so it kind of flows a little better if you start with part 1, but you don't have to. You will have to excuse my strange voice and possibly my heavy breathing, because around here we're passing around germs like, I don't know, something you pass around easily. Germs. Candy. I don't know. Do people pass around candy? Is that the term? I don't know. I have no idea. Anyway, so far, we have covered, in the Haunted Trail series, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and now part of Pennsylvania. If you haven't already listened to those, I definitely recommend doing so, because it helps my download numbers. But also because I think they're pretty good. I enjoy them. You do not have to go back and listen to them in order. They each will stand alone on their own, but, kind of gives you the feel when you're traveling south to north. It's entirely up to you. For those who are newcomers, a little quick history of the Appalachian Trail. It is a national scenic trail that runs through 14 states on the east coast of the USA. That means with Pennsylvania, we are hitting state number 7, and we will be halfway through our states. People who hike the entire length of the trail in one shot are called through hikers. A through hike takes approximately 6 months to complete, depending on many factors like physical ability or weather. Most through hikers go south to north, or a northbound hike, which is why I have structured these episodes in that order. You can also travel southbound and start in Maine and head to Georgia. Or you can do what some call a flip-flop, where you start somewhere in the approximate middle, hike one way, then go back to the middle and hike the other way. Most flip-floppers start in Harper's Ferry. I believe there's actually a flip-flop festival in April sometime. I want to say it's around the spring equinox, but I'm not 100%, so don't quote me on that. But let's get back to our stories. We will begin in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where we left off in the last episode. One of the most haunted locations in Carlisle is the Carlisle Barracks. Today, the Carlisle Barracks is considered one of the best military schools in the world. 3 of its most famous graduates are John J. Pershing, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and Omar N. Bradley. Originally, this military post was the spot where early traders and settlers stopped to rest before they made their way across the Allegheny Mountains. In 1757, Carlisle became a permanent military post. When George Washington visited the area during the Revolutionary War, he recommended this site be used for the newly proposed military academy, but Carlisle lost out to West Point, New York. In the late 1830s, the post evolved into a school to instruct the U.S. Army's mounted forces. During the Civil War, Union troops occupied both the post and the town of Carlisle. Major General Jeb Stuart, a Confederate soldier, demanded the post and town surrender, and when they didn't, he shelled both and set fire to the post, burning several buildings to the ground. In 1879, the Carlisle Barracks became the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. It was the first government-run boarding school for Native American children, and its goal was forced assimilation of Native children into white American society under the belief of kill the Indian, save the man. There are 186 graves of children who died while attending the school, and they belong to 140 plus different tribes. The Indian school's most famous student, and the best athlete, was Jim Thorpe, who was an Olympian. At the onset of World War I, the barracks was returned to the War Department. It became a hospital that specialized in the treatment of mental rehabilitation for those suffering from the newly identified trauma called shell shock. By the 1920s, the medical field service took over the barracks. They remained for 26 years, and then in 1946, Carlisle was used for a series of 6 different Army schools. In 1951, the U.S. Army War College relocated to Carlisle, and to this day prepares senior officers for high command. The expansive history has left the barracks haunted by a variety of ghosts. Some of this activity reflects the time when Carlisle was the Indian school. Many witnesses have reported hearing faint band music from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The music usually sounds a little off-key, like a young student band is playing, but there are no musicians around. The ghost of Jim Thorpe is also seen at Carlisle. People passing the old gymnasium at night report hearing the dribbling of a basketball and the shuffle of sneakers. What is unusual is when this is heard, there are no lights on in the gym. Most witnesses feel this must be the Indian school's basketball team continuing to practice, with Thorpe as its star athlete. Jim Thorpe's apparition has also been seen at the LaTorte View Community Center. Other ghosts have also been seen at this center. Many have seen a well-dressed female student and a man dressed in farm clothes in the cellar. The community center is called Purgatory because it's so full of ghostly activity. Some of the ghostly activity reflects a much earlier time. At Carlisle, there's a building that was originally used as a powder magazine. Today, this building is used as a museum that houses a variety of military artifacts. During the Revolutionary War, German soldiers, called Hessians, were captured at the Battle of Trenton. Many believe the Hessian soldiers, who were forced to construct the building in 1777, still haunt it. Today, strange noises are heard coming from the Powder Magazine Museum, as well as witness reports that describe sightings of very tall Hessian soldiers wearing oddly pointed hats. A new resident staying at a nearby barracks in the 1990s reported hearing loud noises from the magazine late at night, so he went to investigate. The doors at this time of night are normally locked, but this man discovered that the first door was unlocked, so of course he went in. There he found the second door was shut tight. As he peered through the window, he literally fell down in shock at what he saw. He expected to see a museum full of military artifacts, but instead saw several Hessian soldiers standing in a room that was obviously the old 1700 powder magazine. Another ghost seen at Carlisle is a woman dressed in old-fashioned green-colored clothing. She is always seen entering or exiting various homes along the barracks Flower Road. When people have attempted to speak to her, she just vanishes into one of the homes. But people inside these homes never see her enter. In the Washington Hall guest house, people often report hearing the distressed calls of an infant, and when they go in search of the baby, they discover there are no children in the house. One officer training at Carlisle had a series of unusual events happen in his apartment that's located in one of the barracks that was rebuilt after it had been burned by Major General Jeb Stuart. He bought a famous print of the Major General and had it framed and hung it on his apartment wall. After he was away on a vacation, he returned to find this picture had fallen off the wall. Yet the nails were still in place and the frame and wire on the back were intact. but the glass was smashed. How this glass was broken is what he found odd. It appeared as if a foot had precisely stomped down over Stewart's face, smashing the glass only in this area. This officer had the glass replaced and rehung his print. But shortly after returning from another absence, he found the print once more on the floor with the glass damaged, specifically over the face. He had the glass replaced again, and the same thing happened for a third time. Not giving up, the officer had the glass replaced yet again and hung the print back in its place. A few weeks later, after being out late one night, he and his wife were awakened by the sound of the print being broken. They had heard the picture fall from the wall, and then they heard a popping, crushing sound like a heavy foot twisting on the glass. The officer again saw that the glass was smashed over the face of the famous Confederate cavalryman who ordered the burning of the barracks in 1863. Stewart made a lot of enemies when he made the decision to burn the barracks. After this repeated print incident, many felt this was the ghost of a Union soldier who took his chance to take his revenge. In addition to those locations, there are reportedly several haunted buildings on the nearby campus of Dickinson College. And in October of 1872, there were reports of a ghost roaming the streets of Carlisle. We're going to continue north on the trail to the Cove Mountain Shelter, which was formerly known as the Thelma Marks Shelter. This is our fourth and last murder site along the trail, in this section. In September 1990, 25-year-old Molly LaRue and her 26-year-old boyfriend Jeffrey Hood were working their way through Pennsylvania on their southbound through hike when they were murdered at the Thelma Marks Shelter outside Duncannon. Jeffrey was found shot in the head, back, and side. Molly was bound, raped, and stabbed 8 times in the neck and upper back. A boot print on her elbow and nylon rope around her neck suggested that she had also been tortured. 8 days after the murder, park rangers in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, arrested a bearded man matching the description of the man seen near the murder site. He was wearing Jeffrey Hood's hiking boots and carrying his backpack. Inside the pack were personal items belonging to Jeffrey, and a gun and knife that were both later linked to the murders. The man was Paul David Crew, and he was also wanted in Florida for the murder of a hairdresser. The Thelma Marks Shelter was eventually torn down, and the Cove Mountain Shelter was built in its place. People still have uneasy feelings in the area. Feeling uneasy in an area where such a heinous act happened isn't unusual. Personally, I believe places like that are heavy with the negative energy that comes from something like that. Just north of the Cove Mountain Shelter is the town of Duncannon, Pennsylvania. There in town was an old inn known as Amity Hall Inn. The structure was seriously damaged during an early morning fire on May 19, 2009. The fire was ruled arson, and multiple people were convicted. The inn was rumored to be haunted, and, according to the defendants' written statements, the break-in that led to the fire was the result of their interest in the rumors. The original Amity Hall Inn, which was farther north of the current location, was built in the 1600s along a stagecoach path. The inn was relocated in 1770, and it grew into a massive complex. It was considered one of the first modern truck stops in the 1930s and 40s. The inn included snack bars, trucker dormitories, and even a drive-in theater, as well as other facilities, which garnered it national acclaim. There are pictures of the inn in the Library of Congress. Amity Hall was so famous it was actually trademark protected, just like Coca-Cola or McDonald's. You couldn't use the name Amity Hall because it was associated with the inn. The inn remained an upscale hotel and restaurant until about the 1990s. In 2009, the fire all but destroyed the structure. About the only thing that remained was the original brick inn. The owners decided to tear down the structure because significant work would be needed to restore it. Allegedly, before the Civil War, a man murdered his family on the property. The wife was found beaten and stabbed on the front porch, and the children were found upstairs with their father, who had committed suicide. The house became a hotel, and people started seeing strange blue-white lights. Some people have seen a woman staring out the window. Outside in the parking lot, a dark, shadowy figure is sometimes seen roaming around. I do want to make a point to say that the narrative explaining the reasons behind the haunting at Amity Hall Inn do not coincide with the inn's known history. There is no documentation found to corroborate the story, but it's still a good story. I will say that even though the particular story about the murder-suicide of the family doesn't coincide with the history, that doesn't mean there aren't hauntings, and that the strange figures in the parking lot or the woman that looked out the window aren't true stories. With such a long history that started in the 1600s and so many people in and out of the inn, it would not be strange to have some type of paranormal activity, which is why I included it. There is another more well-known haunted location within Duncannon, and that's the Doyle Hotel. Originally a 3-story wooden hotel built in the 1770s, it was a stopping point along the main route going north along the Susquehanna River, and has a rich and storied history. It caught fire and burned to the ground in 1803, and was replaced by the current brick building. In 1880, it was purchased by Adolphus Busch of Anheuser-Busch fame, and it opened again as the Johnson Hotel in 1905. Busch died in 1913, and the building reverted to the Budweiser Company, but was quickly sold off with many other places when Prohibition hit in 1920. The hotel then went through several private owners, finally becoming the Doyle in 1944, after Jim Doc Doyle won $444,444.44 in the Irish lottery. Doyle opened and operated the hotel into the 1990s. Throughout the Great Depression, World War II, Prohibition, and the passing of the 13th Amendment, the Johnson Hotel serviced the nation's travelers. It was during the early post-war years that the Appalachian Trail was developed, and a new type of traveler made their way up and down the eastern states. The Doyle served hikers of the trail from day one, with the Doyles staying on to welcome the weary on into the 1990s. After he sold the hotel, it went through a period of transition and a plethora of owners. In 2021, the Doyle was purchased again, and for the first time in decades received a major renovation. The Doyle Hotel has been a part of the Appalachian Trail adventures for a long time, and it's had a reputation of being haunted for just as long. Room 24 is one of the more active areas. Guests have said that the rocking chair in the room was seen rocking by itself. There have also been reports of the bed shaking violently at night and the apparition of a man standing at the end of the bed. Recently, a friend of mine from high school hiked the section of the Appalachian Trail that included Duncannon, and she stayed at the Doyle. She gave me permission to share her experience, and this is her account in her own words. As promised, my experience at the Doyle. Upon arrival and surprise, the doors were locked. After making a call, in which I couldn't understand the person on the line, I heard a "I'll be down to get you" in the driest of tones. When the door unlocked, Lurch answered. Lurch was also wearing an N95 mask, which he was probably wearing while speaking to me previously on the phone. His only brief greeting was, "Follow me to your room." Okay. The moment I walked in, I was immediately taken back in time. The Doyle was first built in 1905 and served as a boarding house. It was then rebuilt and historically hasn't changed much in appearance since. I had just descended down a steep rocky slope, aka the AT. My knees and feet were wrecked. now with full gear climbing up 3 sets of steep stairs. I was not holding high regards to Lurch. Wasn't the bellhop supposed to take your bags? Anyway, we came to my room and unlocked it, handing me the keys. I walked in and instantly my skin prickled and stood up on end. My adrenaline hitched up about 3 octaves, and I slowly spun around in place, looking for what is the cause. Intuitively, I knew, but the brain searches for a reason. The first thing I noticed was 3 different locks on the door. A deadbolt, a cross lock, and the standard door lock. Why 3? I immediately went to the closet, empty but extremely small and narrow. My nerves settled a bit, and I had town chores to do. Coming back into my room, I was resting while checking in at home, and the doorknob rattled and twisted. I jumped and about hit the ceiling. I opened the door. Nobody there, not even the sound of footsteps. Okay, maybe someone had the wrong room by mistake. I brushed it off and was heading down to the bar for dinner. I ran into Lurch. I asked by any chance did he maybe need something. Someone had been at my door. He said no, I would have knocked, and besides, you're the only guest here. Puzzle pieces fit together, and I knew my intuition was spot on. But first, over a drink, I asked the bartender. I also knew to take what he said with a grain of salt, too. After speaking with the bartender, he confirmed my suspicion. Continuing on, as I was conversing with the bartender, he said that I was only one of a few that could sense these things, but I should be okay. It was the floor above mine that would be of concern. There were, however, 20 deaths in the hotel. Knowing this info just confirmed what I already knew. I let it go until early the next morning around 3:33 a.m., known as the witching hour, also when the veil between realms is thinnest, I was woken out of a sound sleep by my door shaking. Someone was trying to get in. A pale light lit the hallway outside. Under the gap of my door, I peered. No one. No shadows. I grabbed my hiker knife. Hey, it was all I had. The doorknob was physically turning, and the door itself was moving as whatever it was trying to get in. There were no shadows, shoes, or other noise. With only my knife, I slowly and steadily unlocked the locks and opened the door a crack and peered out. Then, seeing absolutely nothing, opened the door fully and observed everything as it should be. No creaking floorboards of weight shifting, no movement, not even a fleck of dust was disturbed. I closed my doors, locking all the locks, became comfortable, then the doorknob jiggled and turned again. At this point, I called upon Archangel Michael and smudged the door, sealing it so no negative energies or entities could enter. Shortly after my hurried protection ceremony, the turning and shaking of the door was silenced. By a miracle, I was able to drift off into a dreamless sleep. The next morning, while resupplying at the hostel, I was told that another couple a few weeks earlier had called the hostel in the middle of the night, the woman in a panic, begging for bunks to stay there. The same thing happened to them, but they packed up and left the hotel immediately and stayed at the hostel. That was her account of her stay at the Doyle. In my research, I read one story that told of how somebody went there and there was a weird odor in the hotel, and after several people complained, they went in search of the odor and found that someone who had checked in was dead in their room and had been dead in their room for more than a couple of days. The number of deaths at the Doyle, 20, actually might be slightly lower than the actual number of people who have died there. Personally, I was happy to learn that the Doyle had been saved and renovated, and I'm hoping to make it there in the near future. Not by myself. Leaving Duncannon, hikers will enter state game lands and come to the area of Yellow Springs Village. Once a booming coal and lumber town in the late 1800s, Yellow Springs is nothing more than a ghost town of crumbling ruins. but there are still former residents roaming around. One is the headless apparition of an old trackman who was decapitated by a railroad train accident. He now roams the area between Yellow Springs and Stony Valley searching for his head. Another headless apparition is seen in the area as well, though he knows where his head is. It's in the wheelbarrow he's been pushing along the trail. Beyond Yellow Springs is the Rausch Gap Shelter. The original Rausch Gap Shelter was built in 1973 and was replaced by the current structure in 2011. Rausch Gap's history began when Dr. Kugler opened a coal mine in the lower anthracite region of Pennsylvania in the northern slope of Sharp Mountain in present-day Cold Spring Township, Lebanon County, in 1823. It was 5 years later, in 1828, when the Dauphin and Susquehanna Coal Company, which Kugler was part of, constructed the shanty town of Rausch Run in a very stony valley near where the present-day rail trail goes through. Between the years 1850 and 1851, the coal company constructed a railroad from Dauphin County, to Rausch Run, which had been renamed Rausch Gap sometime between 1839 and 1851 in Lebanon County. By June of 1851, there were nearly 24 board and stone houses, along with other scattered structures. Likely around this time, the town received the majority of the burials in the local cemetery. In 1854, the railroad was extended to Auburn, Schuylkill County, completing the 51-mile line. The town of Rausch Gap declined in 1872 when the railroad headquarters, which were previously stationed at the town, were moved. Because of the relocation of headquarters, the lack of good quality coal, and the United States Civil War, the town became virtually deserted by 1900. During the time when the railroad was transporting coal, one woman and her husband lived near the tracks, and it was her husband's job to throw the switch to prevent train collisions. When he died, his wife took over his duties, but she was so distraught over his death, she forgot to throw the switch one night. There was a train accident as a result. The woman was so depressed over what she had done, she stepped in front of an oncoming train and, of course, died. Some nights you can see her holding a lantern, awaiting her fate. If she sees you, she'll run straight at you and through you, and then you become cursed. People also hear odd sounds and have an eerie feeling around the shelter. Our next stop as we continue our trek north is Fort Indiantown Gap. The name Indiantown Gap was fashioned from the Native American presence and the geography. Indiantown is derived from the Native American villages that once existed in the vicinity of present-day Fort Indiantown Gap, and Gap refers to the separation in the Blue Mountains through which the creek Indiantown Run flows. Indiantown Gap was dedicated March 3, 1941, and was officially named Indiantown Gap Military Reservation. It was one of the nation's busiest Army training camps, serving as the staging area for New York Port of Embarkation. Now known as a National Guard Training Center, Fort Indiantown Gap today is home to the Pennsylvania Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, and the headquarters of the Pennsylvania National Guard, as well as several tenant organizations. It is the primary training site for the Pennsylvania National Guard, as well as units from other branches of the military, both active duty and reserve component, law enforcement agencies, and other local, state, and federal agencies. Major facilities include Muir Army Airfield, which is the second busiest heliport in the U.S. Army, the Eastern Army National Guard Aviation Training Site, a state-of-the-art helicopter training center, the 166th Regiment and Educational Complex for Combat Arms Training, the Northeast Counter-Drug Training Center, and the U.S. Army Reserve Center. Fort Indiantown Gap is annually among the busiest National Guard training centers in the country, regularly hosting over 100,000 personnel per year for training. If you look for ghost stories associated with Fort Indiantown Gap, you will come across the story of the Blue-Eyed Six. In 1878, life insurance companies required no proof of insurable interest. This meant that anyone willing to pay the premiums could take out a policy on another individual, even if they had never met the person. In July 1878, 4 men met at a hotel in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania, and hatched a sinister plot. They took out several life insurance policies, totaling $8,000, on a neighbor named Joseph Raber. Raber lived with his housekeeper in a charcoal burner's hut in the Blue Mountain region of Lebanon County. An impoverished man, Raber depended on the charity of others for support. Officially, the men acquired the policies to take care of Raber for the rest of his life and to ensure that his burial expenses would be covered upon his death. In actuality, the men intended to take care of Raber permanently and then collect the policy payouts for themselves. While the masterminds of the plan were willing to invest in the scheme, they weren't willing to do the dirty deed of killing the widower. Not long after the paperwork was signed, the 4 men hired 2 assassins to kill Raber. On December 7, 1878, the contracted killers drowned the old man in Indiantown Creek. The scheme nearly worked. The coroner initially declared that Raber's death was an accident. Raber's remains were laid to rest in the Moonshine United Zion Church Cemetery, just a stone's throw from the river where his death occurred. It wasn't until the son-in-law of one of the original conspirators came forward to police that the men were arrested in connection with the death of Joseph Raber. In an unprecedented court decision, all 6 men, the original 4 conspirators plus the 2 assassins, were tried together. This, along with the fact that each suspect had blue eyes, led newspapers to refer to the men as the Blue-Eyed Six. All 6 were found guilty of the murder in April 1879, though one of the conspirators, George Zeckman, was later granted a second trial and acquitted due to the lack of direct evidence against him. The remaining 5 were sentenced to death by hanging. The unusual nature of the crime and the striking nickname given to the killers inspired Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's short story, The Red-Headed League. A variety of legends also sprung up around the case of the Blue-Eyed Six, some more accurate than others. One tale claimed that the killers were interred alongside Raber in the Moonshine United Zion Church Cemetery. Another maintained that the 6 were hanged from a tree in that very cemetery. While Raber was indeed buried at Moonshine, the executions of his attackers occurred at the county prison. Their bodies were then buried in various graveyards around the county. Such inconsistencies haven't stopped the Moonshine Church from developing an extremely haunted reputation, however. Located on the Fort Indiantown Gap Army Base, Moonshine Church is named after Henry Moonshine. Henry Moonshine donated the land in memory of his son, who died at the age of 14 around the turn of the 19th century. The cemetery where Joseph Raber is buried, and where his headstone can still be viewed, is adjacent to the church. Originally, a log cabin served as the site's worship house. When the cabin burned down in the 1960s, it was replaced by the elongated white church that stands there today. As for the spirits that reportedly haunt the property, many draw direct connections to the Blue-Eyed Six and the murder of Joseph Raber. Visitors have encountered flickering blue lights or glowing blue eyes hovering around the cemetery. Some say that the blue lights come in a configuration of 6, and that they are the spirits of the Blue-Eyed Six paying penance for their crime. Others claim to have seen the ghost of Raber himself wandering through the cemetery or lurking within Moonshine Church at night. The ghosts of fallen soldiers and deceased members of the Moonshine family have also been seen. Not every tale associated with Moonshine is connected to the Blue-Eyed Six. One especially sinister local legend claims that the church was once a murder house where many people were killed. This story says that if you go into the woods behind the church at midnight, you'll not be able to find your way out again, or that if you approach the church from the back, a pentagram can be seen on its back door. There's the legend of a girl who went into the church and said the Lord's Prayer backwards, and was struck dead by lightning. Another tale, unsupported by any local media reports, was that a mother had a nervous breakdown and killed her 4 kids there before committing suicide in the 1980s. And of course, if you approach the church after hours, you are cautioned not to look in the windows, or you might see ghosts gliding between the pews. Some say cars of curious visitors, if turned off, won't restart. Others swear to seeing ghosts peering in through the church windows. Then there's the ghost most feared by the locals, an Indian spook known as the Red Devil. And several spirits of Native Americans have been reported roaming the cemetery. And with that, we're going to end part 2 of the Haunted Trail in Pennsylvania. We have one more section to do, and that'll be part 3, and that's coming next week. Remember, you can find Lurk wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, and also at lurkpodcast.com, where you can find episodes along with links to our social media pages. You'll find me mostly on Facebook, though I pop up on Instagram and every now and then Twitter. We also have a YouTube channel if you prefer listening that way. Make sure you like and subscribe. If you'd like a little more Lurk in your life, you can become a loyal lurker at Patreon for just $5 a month. You can help out the show and get a little extra content. And until next time, keep lurking.